Oh, hi everyone. I hope you're enjoying your day home and you're staying warm and got a little bit of extra sleep. But thanks for joining me to make our first e-learning experience a great success and ensuring that we have a nice long summer and are out before Memorial Day. So, just a reminder, due today is your French Revolution source evaluation on the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Hopefully, that gave you a good sense of what was accomplished in the first phase of the French Revolution. Please turn that in our Google shared folder. That's actually what I'm going to use to count as your attendance today. So, thanks for doing that. Due tomorrow, there's really no homework, but just a heads up, I'm not sure if we're going to see each other tomorrow, so check your email tomorrow morning if school's canceled again, and I'll give you further instructions for our second day of e-learning. How exciting. All right, well, if you haven't already, grab your workbooks. We're going to pick up where we left off yesterday on page 44 of our French Revolution timeline. So go ahead and pause this if you need to grab that workbook. All right, so a quick recap of where we left off yesterday. What we've done so far is we've looked at the causes of the French Revolution, both long-term and short-term. And we're starting to look at the various phases of the French Revolution. Yesterday, we talked a lot about what initially caused the revolution, or the first phase. And that spark was when the king, Louis XVI, decided he needed to call the Estates General and fix a very dire financial situation in France, hoping to get the First and Second Estates to reform their legal policies and get rid of the exemptions from their taxes in order to save the French government. And what this does is it initiates a lot of anger because of the way that the Estates General is meeting and because Louis XVI had called troops to Paris in order to protect the city during this tumultuous time. So what we're kind of seeing is that two revolutions are starting at the same time. The first one, a revolution of elites, is started in the tennis court oath, when members of the Third Estate, with some members of the First and Second, decide that they are going to ignore the Estates General and form their own government and create a constitution for a more enlightened, modernized French state. And at the same time, a second revolution begins among the common people who are really desperate for financial stability and food. So they storm the Bastille shortly after, thinking that this would be full of weapons that they could arm themselves against the king's troops. So they're really growing distrustful of their government. The other events that we briefly went through align with either that first or second revolution. So for example, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen and later the Constitution are these legal documents that enshrine Enlightenment values into law. So they're the outcome of the tennis court oath. Whereas this other event that we're going to talk more about in a little bit, the Women's March to Versailles, this is a continuation of this second revolution happening among the common people. Keeping these two revolutions in mind is going to help us pursue this question today. So why did the revolution move into a second, more radical phase? In other words, why did the liberal phase fail to achieve enough of the revolutionary agenda to stop right then and there in 1791 with a constitutional monarchy? So really quick, let's review these two revolutionary agendas. And particularly in light of the source evaluation you've done on the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, hopefully it becomes pretty clear that by the time the first phase of the revolution is over, a lot of elites are really satisfied with the legal changes and the creation of a constitutional monarchy in France. So what they've achieved is an overthrow of the absolute monarch. There are now checks on the power of the king. They've gotten rid of the estate system to make everybody equal under the law. So they're putting these ideas into practice. But if we look at the agenda of the common people, not everything is satisfied, especially the most pressing item on that list, the demand for affordable food. So all these legal changes are really good. They represent a liberal revolution, but they don't fix the economic problems that were leading to the revolution to begin with. So let's turn to page 45 and dig a little bit deeper into what happened during each phase of the revolution and get more into this second phase to help you understand why it happened. So first, let's recap the liberal phase one more time. What we have happening in the liberal phase is the overthrow, there's a spelling error there, that's all right, the overthrow of an absolute monarchy and replacing it with a constitutional monarchy. So in a sense, it is a complete revolution. Now, if we were to dig deeper into how it achieved the agenda of elites, here's what we have. We have a constitution that protects the natural rights of citizens and declares all of them equal under the law with those natural rights. It puts checks on the power of government. Government cannot infringe upon those inalienable natural rights. And ultimately, what this symbolizes is putting Enlightenment ideas into practice. Ideas from John Locke and Rousseau and Montesquieu about what modern government should look like. Here are some specific key events and examples that we have looked at to prove this to be the case. This starts with the Tennis Court Oath, this commitment to writing a constitution, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which you've read, and finally the Constitution itself, which maybe we could take a glance at it this week. It looks a lot like, and it reads a lot like the American Constitution. We know that was a big inspiration for the French Revolution. So in other words, that agenda you've got to the left, we see it being achieved in the liberal phase of the revolution. However, there are other events during this liberal phase that symbolize that maybe the revolution is not going to be complete. And those other events of significance are the storming of the Bastille and this Women's March on Versailles. So we've talked about the storming of the Bastille. Let's talk about the Women's March on Versailles a little bit, and let's consider who participated in these events and how their agenda differs from that of elites, helping us to explain why a second revolution is going to unfold. So another important event that happened in October of 1789, the first year that the revolution started, was the Women's March on Versailles. So we know after the storming of the Bastille that the common people throughout France are really dissatisfied with their government, and they really believe that their government has control over bread. Many people had heard rumors that the king was stockpiling all this bread in Versailles. And that seems ridiculous to us, but we're talking about people who are very desperate for food. So in this spontaneous event in October, a group of women, they're actually fishmongers, people that work on the docks, so they are all about getting food, starving and desperate, they band together and they march from Paris all the way to the Palace of Versailles, which is quite a long walk. And you can see along the way, they arm themselves. And they're chanting, especially to the Queen, Marie Antoinette, that they're going to tear out her heart and fry her liver. And they end up breaking into the palace and getting very close to the king and queen and their children, but ultimately fail to kill them or take them captive, whatever they were going to do. Now, this event is actually really significant because it does convince the king that the situation is really desperate. He decides after the Women's March on Versailles to accept the role as a constitutional monarch. So we see that some of these more radical events, the actions of the common people, do have an effect on the success of the liberal phase. But ultimately, these events really more align with the agenda of the common people, their desperate need for food and financial stability. And that's ultimately why there's a second phase of the revolution. So in this second phase, it's really a second revolution in and of itself. It overthrew the constitutional monarchy for a republic, a much more radically liberal form of government that had already been established in the United States. Unfortunately, for reasons we'll explore more tomorrow, that republic didn't really function as a republic should and really looked more like a dictatorship in practice. So ultimately, why did we need a second revolution in France? Because the liberal phase failed to satisfy the agenda of the common people. For them, the revolution was not over. So let's talk about some key events that happen in this second radical phase. One is that Louis XVI and his family attempt to flee France, and they're caught along the way. When they're arrested, Louis XVI and his wife are put on trial, and they're declared traitors and are executed. So this is called the Flight to Varennes. It was assumed that Louis XVI and his family were fleeing the country in order to seek safe haven from other monarchs outside of France who were really appalled at what was going on, and they were really afraid for themselves that their own governments would be overthrown. And so it was assumed and likely that Louis XVI was going abroad to get help from abroad to declare war against his own people and retake the throne or reestablish himself as an absolute monarch. What we see happening in this picture is Louis XVI and his family being caught. There was actually a soldier there. They stayed at a hotel, and there was a soldier stationed there that recognized the face of the king from coins. and called and got him arrested. So he's brought back to Paris and put on trial. And here we see the execution of Louis XVI. So when you have a constitutional monarchy and you get rid of the monarch part, you're just left with a government based on a constitution and the legislators that defend those laws. Well, that's a republic. So the killing of Louis XVI ends up creating a republic in France. But this republic is on really shaky grounds. It is not stable and there is no order. And the reason for that is because in the midst of this revolution, France ends up going to war, both abroad against powers who want to stop the French Revolution from spreading, and with itself. Within France, a civil war emerges among counter-revolutionaries, people that supported the king and did not support the republic and want to bring monarchy back to France. So this is really stretching this new government very thin and trying to recreate order when it's just created its own first republic. So things are really unstable. In order to address that instability, the leaders of the republic decide they need to take emergency measures. And those emergency measures come in the form of this Committee of Public Safety. Like we've explored with Rome and even mentioned with our laws today in the United States, when there is an emergency declared, it gives a body executive power to ignore the normal legislative process and pass laws very quickly. And this was what the Committee of Public Safety was designed to do. So leading the Committee of Public Safety is this guy Robespierre. We'll meet him through a movie in class tomorrow. And he wants to address the issues of the common people. And they do radical things in order to do that. First, they try to establish price controls. So they set price limits on bread so people can afford bread. But more than that, they want to make sure that people are exposed to propaganda that makes them continue to support the revolution, in particular the Republic, in order to end the counter-revolutionary movement. So one example of that is they created a new calendar. The calendar wiped away the old months and the old system of keeping time because it went back to the church, and they want to establish a more enlightened calendar. The other example you have on your screen went so far as to get rid of old playing cards and create new decks of playing cards. If you think about your typical playing card, it's got kings and queens. That's no good. In the Republic, they want to get rid of everything that used to be associated with monarchy. So if you look at these cards, they are in French, but maybe you can do a little translation. They emphasize new Republican values like liberty of marriage. Women gained new rights in the Republic. Liberty of the races. They wanted to establish racial equality in France as well. And liberty of rights, that's the one in the bottom left, that all people are equal under the law. And the general principle of peace. So we were working really hard to push out this propaganda to stabilize France again. However, the most radical measure that the Committee of Public Safety took was to simply put on trial and quickly execute anyone that appeared to be a counter-revolutionary. And this is when the revolution becomes the reign of terror, when tens of thousands of people, for very small reasons, are declared counter-revolutionaries, put through a quick trial system, and executed by guillotine. And that is where we're going to pick up with the revolution tomorrow. So we see the guillotine in action on the left, and on the right, we see an international reaction, the reaction from Britain, thinking, what are they doing in France? The world is burning, and they've lost all control of this revolution. So we'll go over the radical phase with a little review tomorrow, and then we'll pick up from there with the Reign of Terror. Maybe I'll see you then. Maybe I'll see you Friday. Check your email tomorrow if you're not coming to school, and we'll go from there. Have a good one.